I pulled into the employee lot at Yellowstone's thermal monitoring station on a Tuesday morning in late April, diesel engine ticking as it cooled. The building sat low against sagebrush hills, prefab construction with that government-issue beige siding that looked the same whether you were in Wyoming or Nevada or anywhere else the Forest Service planted a field office. Mountains still held snow at elevation. Air smelled clean and sharp, pine resin and sulfur mixing in a way I'd need to get used to. Thermal features specialist. That's what my hiring paperwork said. Fancy title for someone who'd be spending most days checking water temperatures and pH levels, making sure Old Faithful wasn't about to blow a gasket. I'd finished my master's in geological sciences 8 months back, spent the winter applying to mining consultancies and petroleum companies. This was supposed to be temporary, seasonal work to pad the resume while I waited for something real to open up. Except Grandpa Francis died in February. Heart attack, sudden and complete. And somehow that changed everything. I'd grown up 3 hours south in Jackson, spent summers hearing his stories about working this same park. Never understood why he'd stayed his whole career when he could have made twice the salary in private sector. After the funeral, Mom mentioned they still hadn't filled his old position. Said it almost casual, folding his shirts into donation boxes. You could apply if you wanted to spend some time where he worked. So here I was. Not sure if I was honoring his memory or just avoiding real decisions. The monitoring station smelled like burnt coffee and old paperwork inside. Mariah Harper sat at one of the desks, updating logs in handwriting so precise it could have been printed. She'd introduced herself my first day, explained the rotation schedules and equipment protocols. 47, maybe 48. Gray, streaking through dark hair she kept pulled back tight. The kind of competence that didn't need to announce itself. "Morning," she said without looking up. "Coffee's fresh if you're brave." "How bad?" "Made it myself, so worse than yesterday." She finished her notation, capped the pen. "You've got the Western Loop today. Artemisia Basin through to Obsidian Creek. Should be straightforward." I'd been on the job 6 days, long enough to learn the route markers and equipment checks, not long enough to stop feeling like I was playing dress-up in Grandpa's old life. The uniform fit fine. Khaki shirt, green pants, thermal-resistant boots that still needed breaking in. Specialized monitor clipped to my belt alongside the two-way radio. Everything official and proper. Mariah stood, pulled something from her desk drawer, laminated card about the size of a playing card. She held it between 2 fingers, considering. "There's standard protocols," she said, "and then there's the other ones." "Other ones?" She handed me the card. "Unofficial, not in any manual, but experienced staff follow them." The lamination was yellowed at the edges, creased from being carried in pockets. 6 rules typed in that old dot matrix font, numbered but not explained. 1. Avoid thermal features during temperature inversions. Postpone readings until inversion clears. 2. Never respond to voices calling from unoccupied hot springs or fumaroles. 3. Carry iron filings when investigating unauthorized access to restricted zones. 4. If steam patterns form geometric shapes, document from maximum distance and return to station immediately. 5. Do not approach thermal features displaying violet luminescence regardless of time of day. 6. Report all temporal discrepancies in digital watches or GPS devices before continuing patrol. I read through them twice. Looked up at Mariah. She'd already turned back to her desk, sorting through sample vials. "This is hazing, right?" I said. "New guy gets the weird rules. Everyone sees how long before he catches on. It's not hazing." "Temperature inversions affecting hot spring readings, sure. That's basic atmospheric science. But violet luminescence? Voices from fumaroles?" I tapped the card. "Temporal discrepancies in GPS devices? Your grandfather helped write those," Mariah said. Calm, matter of fact, the way someone might mention the weather. Francis spent 23 years monitoring thermal features. He knew what he was documenting. That stopped me. Grandpa Francis had been methodical about everything. Measured twice, cut once. The kind of man who labeled his garage tools and kept maintenance logs for his truck. If he'd helped write these rules, but that didn't make them real. Couldn't make them real. There's got to be explanations, I said. Optical phenomena, acoustic anomalies, electromagnetic interference from the thermal activity affecting equipment. Probably. Mariah pulled her hair tighter, checking the ponytail. Follow the protocols anyway. Even though they sound like something from a campfire story. Especially then. She wasn't smiling. Wasn't giving me that look people get when they're putting someone on, waiting for the reaction. Just steady and certain. The way she'd been when showing me how to calibrate the spectrometer or collect water samples without contaminating them. I looked at the card again. The lamination had protected it but couldn't hide the age. Years of handling, maybe decades. Passed from specialist to specialist. How many people have these? Everyone who works thermal features long enough, Mariah said. Your grandfather carried his for 20 years. I've had mine for 14. And you've actually seen things that made these necessary? She considered that. Pulled her equipment vest from the back of her chair, started checking the pockets. Thermometer, sample vials, notebook, measuring tape, all the normal gear. I've seen things I couldn't explain with standard geology, she said finally. So have most people who work here past their first season. The protocols help you navigate what can't be explained. They keep you safe. Safe from what? From making mistakes that can't be undone. She looked at me directly then, brown eyes serious. I know how this sounds. Francis had the same reaction when he started. Took him 3 months before he stopped asking questions and just followed the rules. 3 months. That matched the timeline in my head. Grandpa had started in June, and his letters home didn't mention anything strange until late September. I'd read through them after the funeral, looking for some connection to the man I'd known. Early letters full of routine observations, standard geological data. Then something shifted. Never explicit, never detailed. Just a change in tone. Like he'd learned something that reframed everything else. I'd figured it was just him settling into the work, finding his rhythm. Maybe it was something else. I'm supposed to just accept this? I held up the card. Carry iron filings and watch for violet lights. You're supposed to keep it with you, Mariah said. What you accept is your business. But the protocols exist for reasons. Better to follow them and feel foolish than ignore them and learn why they matter. She finished checking her vest, pulled it on, settled it across her shoulders the way someone wears familiar weight. I've got the northern section today, she said. Radio if you need anything. Standard check-in at 1300. And if I see geometric steam patterns or hear voices, then you'll follow Protocol 4 or Protocol 2. She said it simple and direct, and you'll be fine. She headed for the door, paused with her hand on the frame. Your grandfather was good at this work, she said. Careful and thorough. Those protocols kept him safe for over 2 decades. Trust that they're built on experience, even if the experience doesn't make sense yet. Then she was gone, boots crunching on gravel as she walked to her truck. I stood there holding the laminated card. 6 impossible rules for impossible situations. The kind of thing you'd laugh about over beers, except nobody was laughing. Mariah treated them with the same seriousness she gave to calibration standards and safety procedures. I slipped the card into my shirt pocket, grabbed my own equipment vest. The Western Loop wouldn't monitor itself. Artemisia Basin, Obsidian Creek, all the standard checkpoints. Straightforward geological work, just like I'd expected. The card pressed against my chest as I walked to my truck, light enough to forget about, heavy enough to notice. I figured I had time to decide what I believed. Whole season stretched ahead, routine monitoring and data collection. Maybe I'd see something that made the protocols make sense. Probably I'd just spend a few months checking temperatures and pH levels before moving on to something more legitimate. Either way, I'd know soon enough. I started the engine and headed west, unaware that within days I'd understand exactly why my grandfather had spent 20 years following rules that shouldn't need to exist. Artist Point was my third stop that morning. The overlook sat empty. No tour buses yet, just the canyon stretching out in layers of oxidized rhyolite, yellows and oranges and reds stacked in geological time. I walked the designated path toward the thermal monitoring station, a metal box bolted to the rocks about 30 yards from the main viewing platform. Temperature probe in hand, notebook out, standard measurements. The steam caught my attention before I reached the station. It rose in a perfect circle, maybe 15 feet across, white vapor climbing straight up from ground that shouldn't produce any thermal output. I stopped. The monitoring records for this section showed stable baseline temps for the past 8 years. No hydrothermal activity, no subsurface venting. Just solid ground underlain by cooling volcanic rock. I moved closer, boots crunching on the gravel path. The steam kept rising in that geometric pattern, edges sharp as if someone had traced them with a compass. My training said impossible. Thermal features didn't organize themselves into perfect circles. They followed fracture patterns, subsurface weaknesses, geological structures that twisted and branched according to pressure differentials and rock composition. This looked drawn. I pulled the handheld thermal camera from my belt, aimed it at the steam ring. The display showed ambient ground temperature, 53 degrees Fahrenheit, no heat signature, no thermal source whatsoever. The laughter started while I was staring at the impossible readout. Children's voices, high and clear, the kind of sound you'd hear at a playground, kids chasing each other in some game, only they understood the rules too. I turned toward the overlook, expecting to see a family I'd somehow missed. Empty. The viewing platform stood deserted, no visitors, no cars in the lot. Just me and that circle of steam and the sound of children laughing from nowhere. My hand went to the radio before I'd consciously decided to move. The protocols card sat in my shirt pocket. I could feel the laminated edge against my chest. "Harper, this is Russell. You there?" Static crackled. Then her voice, calm and measured. "Copy, Russell. Go ahead." "I've got a thermal anomaly at Artist Point. Steam venting from solid ground with no heat signature. Geometric pattern. Perfect circle." I paused. The laughter continued, echoing off the canyon walls in a way that made my skin crawl. An audio phenomena, voices where there shouldn't be any. The radio stayed quiet for 3 seconds. 4. Then, "Stay where you are. Don't approach the feature. I'm 15 minutes out." She didn't ask me to verify, didn't question the readings, just said she was coming. I stepped back from the steam ring and waited. Mariah's truck appeared in the lot 12 minutes later. She'd driven fast. She came up the path carrying a case I hadn't seen before. Hard-sided black plastic with clasps that looked military grade. Her face held the same professional calm as always, but her eyes moved different. Scanning, assessing. "Still active?" she asked. I gestured toward the steam. It kept rising in that perfect circle, vapor columns straight as plumb lines in the still air. She set the case down and opened it. Inside sat equipment I didn't recognize from any geological survey catalog. A handheld device with a screen showing wavelength patterns, sensors on extending arms, something that looked almost like a Geiger counter but with different calibration markings. "What is that?" "Specialized monitoring gear." She pulled out the handheld unit and powered it on. "Your grandfather helped design some of it, after Standard Instruments stopped giving useful data." She walked toward the steam ring. I followed 3 steps behind. The device in her hand started displaying patterns, sine waves overlapping in colors that shifted from blue to violet as she approached. She stopped at the edge of the circle, exactly where the steam began rising, and held the sensor array out. Temporal displacement, she said. 0.73 variance. Ground surface is experiencing time at a different rate than surrounding area. I stared at her. That's not possible. No, it's not. She adjusted a dial on the device. But here it is anyway. The children's laughter had stopped when she arrived. Now the air sat heavy with silence, broken only by the faint hiss of steam. Mariah took readings from 4 points around the circle's perimeter, her movements efficient and practiced. This wasn't her first time dealing with something impossible. The realization settled in my chest with uncomfortable weight. "How long has this been happening?" I asked. "Depends what you mean by this." She crouched, examining the ground where steam met solid rock. "Thermal features behaving wrong? Since before the park was established? People dying in ways that don't make sense? At least 100 years? The protocols?" She glanced up at me. "Your grandfather started documenting patterns in the late 80s. By 92, we had enough data to establish safety procedures. Why didn't anyone tell me?" "I gave you the protocols on your 6th day." Her tone stayed matter-of-fact. "Most people need to see something firsthand before they'll believe it. Your grandfather was the same way. Took him 3 months and 2 incidents before he stopped looking for rational explanations." She stood, brushing dust from her knees, and packed the equipment back in its case. "This feature will dissipate in the next hour. They usually do. But it confirms we're in an active period. Temperature inversions, temporal anomalies, audio phenomena, they cluster. When one appears, others follow." My radio crackled before I could respond. "Harper, Russell, this is Black. Need you both at headquarters. We've got a situation." Mariah keyed her radio. "Copy. What's the nature?" "Missing persons, family of 4, last seen yesterday afternoon. The headquarters building sat near Mammoth Hot Springs, a larger version of the monitoring station with actual offices and a proper conference room. Gavin Black met us in the parking lot. Tall guy, military haircut, ranger uniform pressed sharp despite the morning heat building toward 90 degrees. "Russell family," he said, falling into step beside us. "Kyle and Poppy, both early 40s. Twin daughters, age 8. Tourists from California. Rental car found abandoned near Grand Prismatic Spring at 0700 this morning." We entered the building. The air conditioning hit like a wall. "When were they last seen?" Mariah asked. "Yesterday, 16:30 hours. Visitor center security footage shows them entering, asking about hot spring access, safe viewing areas, standard tourist questions." Gavin pulled a folder from under his arm. "But here's where it gets strange." He led us to a desk with a computer monitor, already queued to security footage. The timestamp read 4:32 p.m. previous day. The video showed a family entering through glass doors, man in polo shirt and shorts, woman in a summer dress, 2 girls in matching tank tops and sandals. They approached the information desk, spoke with the ranger on duty for maybe 3 minutes, then left. Normal. Completely ordinary. "Now, here's the witness statements," Gavin said. He pulled out 3 separate reports, handwritten on incident forms. I read the first one, a retired couple from Minnesota who'd been at the visitor center around the same time. They described seeing a family matching the Russells' description, but wearing heavy winter coats, parkas, insulated pants. One witness specifically noted thinking it was odd given the August heat. The second statement came from a park employee working the gift shop. Same description. Family in winter gear asking about hot spring access, looking confused about the season. The third witness was a tour guide. He'd noticed them because the father kept checking his watch and frowning, saying the time didn't match what he remembered. 3 separate witnesses, Gavin said, all describing winter clothing, but the security footage clearly shows summer clothes. I looked at Mariah. Her face had gone still in a way that made my stomach tighten. "What about the rental car?" she asked. "Found unlocked. Keys on the driver's seat. No signs of struggle, but there were items in the vehicle that don't match the timeline. Gavin pulled out another sheet. Winter coats, snow boots, park map with thermal features circled in marker. Can I see the personal effects? Mariah's voice stayed level, but something had shifted in her posture. Gavin led us to an evidence room, small space with locked cabinets and the examination table. He unlocked one cabinet and pulled out clear plastic bags containing the Russell family's belongings. Mariah examined the park map first. Red circles marked 6 thermal features, including Grand Prismatic Spring and Artist Point. She set it down and picked up the next bag, a hotel room keycard. She turned it over in her hands, then looked at me. Check their reservation. Gavin pulled out his phone, accessing the park's visitor database. Russell family, party of 4, checked in at the Old Faithful Inn on August. Wait. He scrolled, frowned. This can't be right. What date? I asked, though part of me already knew. November 18th. He looked up from the screen. Their reservation is for November 18th through November 22nd, 3 months from now. The air conditioning hummed in the silence that followed. I thought about the steam ring at Artist Point, the children's laughter from nowhere, Mariah's device showing temporal displacement like it was a routine measurement. The protocols card sat in my pocket, edges worn from my grandfather's hands. Never respond to voices from unoccupied thermal features. Report temporal discrepancies in digital watches or GPS devices. I'd thought they were metaphors. Safety guidelines dressed up in mysterious language to impress new hires. They weren't. The pieces locked together in my head while Black went to call the superintendent. Hotel keycard dated 3 months forward. Witnesses describing winter coats in August. Steam rising from ground that measured ambient temperature. Francis's letters changing tone after 3 months of work. Not metaphor. Not workplace superstition. The thermal features were creating actual temporal distortions. People from different time periods intersecting in the same physical space at the same moment. The Russell family hadn't just gotten lost. They'd gotten displaced through whatever rift connected August to November, walking between months the way most folks walked between parking lots. And something about that intersection was catastrophic enough that Francis had spent 23 years writing protocols to keep people away from it. My hands went cold, despite the evidence room's stale warmth. I'd read those protocols as safety theater. Temperature inversions and violet luminescence treated the same way mining operations treated canaries. Warning signs you memorized without believing you'd need them. But Francis had needed them. Mariah had needed them for 14 years. And now the Russell family was somewhere in the park, displaced across time, because they'd circled 6 thermal features on a map with a reservation dated November. We need to check Protocol 4, I said. Mariah looked up from the marked map, her expression careful. You're ready for that? Don't know that ready matters. I pulled the laminated card from my pocket. The plastic was warm from body heat, edges soft from Francis's decades of handling. Geometric steam patterns. Document from maximum distance and return immediately. Artist Point this morning wasn't geometric, Mariah said. Perfect circle, but not the kind of pattern Protocol 4 addresses. What kind does it address? She stood, folding the map with precise movements. The kind that marks active temporal zones, places where the rifts are opening rather than just echoing. Her fingers smoothed the map's creases. Your grandfather mapped 17 sites across the park, locations where geothermal activity intersects with temporal instability in geometric configurations. Spirals, hexagons, interlocking triangles, patterns that don't occur in natural hydrothermal systems. Black returned, his radio crackling with dispatcher traffic. Superintendents coordinating with law enforcement. They're treating it as standard missing persons until we provide evidence otherwise. He glanced between us. Which we can't, because explaining temporal displacement to the county sheriff sounds like a career-ending conversation. We document what we find, Mariah said. Same as always. Thermal anomalies, equipment malfunctions, atmospheric conditions that made navigation difficult. She turned to me. But first we need to check the restricted zones. If the Russell family was following a map to specific thermal features, they might have entered areas closed to public access. Norris Geyser Basin, I said. The words came out certain, though I couldn't articulate why. Just something about the map's circled locations and Francis's old field notes I'd read during graduate school research. He mentioned unauthorized footprints near Porcelain Basin in a letter from 1991, called them concerning, but didn't elaborate. Mariah's eyebrows rose slightly. You read his correspondence? Mom kept everything, boxes of letters in her attic. I'd gone through them looking for career advice, back when I thought Francis had just been a dedicated civil servant with geological expertise. Most of it was routine, weather observations, equipment requests, complaints about tourists, but some letters had gaps. Paragraphs where the tone shifted without explaining why. He couldn't explain, Mariah said quietly. Protocol existed partly to protect people from knowledge they weren't ready to carry. She collected her equipment case, checking the clasps. But you're carrying it now. So we check Norris. The drive north took 40 minutes through lodgepole pine forest, still recovering from fires 2 decades old. Mariah drove while I reviewed Francis's protocols again, reading each line as instruction rather than metaphor. Iron filings for unauthorized access. Violet luminescence, meaning don't approach. Temporal discrepancies in digital equipment, all of it describing actual phenomena that occurred in actual locations with actual consequences. How many people know? I asked. About the temporal distortions? Mariah kept her eyes on the road. Active staff? 3 now, including you. Superintendent Cochran knows enough to authorize our work without questions. Your grandfather spent years deciding who could handle the information and who couldn't. And everyone else just thinks we're monitoring thermal temperatures. We are monitoring thermal temperatures. That's not false. She slowed for a bison near the shoulder, giving it wide clearance. But we're also monitoring temporal stability, documenting displacement events, and maintaining containment protocols your grandfather established. Multiple jobs with one title. The road curved past Roaring Mountain, steam venting from dozens of fumaroles across the hillside. Normal geothermal activity. Nothing geometric or violent or temporally displaced. Just superheated groundwater finding paths through fractured rock, the way it had for thousands of years. Except some of those paths led places that weren't just geological. Norris Geyser Basin appeared through the trees. White mineral deposits spread across rolling terrain, boardwalks threading between thermal features that bubbled and hissed. Mariah parked in the employee section, away from the handful of tourist vehicles scattered through the main lot. Late afternoon sunlight angled across the landscape, turning steam golden. Restricted zone is northwest of Porcelain Basin, she said, pulling her equipment case from the truck bed. Closed since 1989 after 3 separate incidents of tourists reporting disorientation and time loss. Official reason is unstable ground. Actual reason is temporal variance, reaching .87 on your grandfather's scale. What happens at .87? People experience time at different rates. Minutes for them, hours for observers, or vice versa. She handed me a handheld radio and a can of orange surveyor's paint. We mark our path going in. If we experience displacement, we follow marks back out. Don't deviate regardless of what we see or hear. My throat went dry. You're saying we might get displaced? I'm saying we take precautions. She started toward the basin's edge, following a faint trail that led away from maintained boardwalks. And we follow Protocol 4. Document, don't engage, return immediately. The trail wound through sagebrush and scattered pine, thermal features hissing on either side. I marked trees every 30 feet with orange spray paint, the chemical smell sharp against sulfur and mineral scent. Mariah walked ahead with her detection equipment, watching the readout screen. Variance increasing, she said. 0.42, 0.51. The ground changed texture underfoot. Mineral deposits gave way to gray clay that stuck to boot treads, then to crystalline formations that crunched with each step. The air temperature dropped despite steam venting nearby. My breath condensed, visible fog in air that had been 70 degrees moments before. 0.68, Mariah said. Her voice sounded distant despite walking 10 feet ahead. We're close. I marked another tree, then stopped. Footprints pressed into the crystalline ground, multiple sets, different sizes, adult boots and small sneakers. The prints led deeper into the restricted zone, toward a stand of dead lodgepole pine surrounding something that glowed pale blue through the gaps. Mariah. She turned, saw where I pointed, and went very still. Her equipment screen showed .79 variance, nearly the same reading we'd gotten at Artist Point that morning. We followed the footprints. My hands shook slightly as I marked trees, counting steps, watching the blue glow intensify. The dead pines formed a rough circle around a clearing maybe 40 feet across. In the center, a hot spring bubbled with water that glowed blue-white, bioluminescent, and wrong. The light didn't behave correctly, didn't cast shadows or reflect off surfaces, just existed as sourceless illumination that hurt to look at directly. And around the spring's edge, standing motionless, were people, the Russell family, Kyle and Poppy and their twin daughters, all wearing the winter coats witnesses had described, but also others. An elderly couple in 1970s hiking gear, a young man in clothes I didn't recognize, old-fashioned cut, maybe 1920s or 30s, all of them standing perfectly still, faces turned toward the glowing water. "Don't approach," Mariah whispered. Her equipment screen showed .92 variance. I couldn't have approached if I wanted to. My legs had locked, every instinct screaming that something was fundamentally wrong with the figures ahead. They stood too still, breathed too shallowly. The winter coats didn't move in the thermal updraft from the spring. Then Kyle Russell turned his head. Not his whole body, just his head, rotating on his neck with mechanical precision. His face was translucent, skin like clouded glass stretched over nothing. Where his eyes should have been, empty sockets gaped, dark and hollow. His mouth opened, but no breath emerged, just a soft clicking sound that might have been vocalization, or might have been something else. The other figures turned as well, all with the same mechanical precision. Hollow shells with translucent skin and empty sockets. Not human anymore. Maybe not alive in any way I understood the term. Something moved in the glowing spring. Not water displacement from geothermal convection. Intentional movement. Shapes rising from superheated liquid that should have been sterile and empty. Forms that resembled nothing I had taxonomy for. Elongated bodies that bent in too many places. Limbs that branched and subdivided. Surfaces that rippled between solid and liquid states. They emerged slowly, water streaming off forms that shouldn't exist. 3 of them, then 5, then more than I could count. They moved between the standing figures, touching translucent faces with appendages that left no marks, positioning the shells with precise care. One of them turned toward us, toward me specifically, though it had no eyes I could identify. When it spoke, the sound came from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through bone rather than air. "Heat shepherds," it said. Not in English, not in any language, but I understood anyway. The meaning transferred directly, bypassing auditory processing. We collect those displaced through geothermal rifts, those caught between moments when temporal stability fractures. "What did you do to them?" My voice came out thin, compressed. Nothing. Everything. They walked between August and November, between present and future, and the crossing unmade them. The entity gestured at the hollow shells with something resembling a limb. "We gather what remains. Preserve the fragments. Without us, they would dissipate completely, scattered across decades like ash. Mariah's hand found my elbow, gripping hard. Warning or support, I couldn't tell. The agreement, she said. Francis Russell's agreement. The entity shifted, its form rippling. Francis Russell understood. The portals have existed since before your species named this place. Ancient thermal vents that penetrate not just Earth, but time itself. We emerged through them seeking heat, seeking temporal gradient to sustain our existence. We had no interest in your kind until your kind began falling through, displaced and dying. So you collect them, I said. Keep them as shells. We preserve what we can. The alternative is complete dissolution. The entity moved closer, stopping at the clearing's edge. Mariah's grip tightened. Francis Russell made covenant. His bloodline would maintain containment protocols, document temporal variance, prevent unnecessary crossing. In exchange, we would gather the displaced, preserve their fragments, prevent cascade events where rifts expand beyond control. The word settled into my chest with the weight of geology, sedimentary layers compressing into stone. His bloodline, I repeated. He had no children when he made covenant, but he knew children would come. New grandchildren would follow. The entity's form stabilized slightly, almost solid. Knew someone would return to maintain what he built. My grandfather's letters. The position staying unfilled after his death. My mother mentioning it casually, like coincidence rather than design. The job offer arriving exactly when petroleum positions fell through. Exactly when I needed employment. Exactly when I was vulnerable to accepting work I'd previously considered beneath my qualifications. Francis had orchestrated everything. Not just the protocols and the equipment and the monitoring systems, but my entire path back to Yellowstone. He'd traded his bloodline's service for temporal containment, then spent decades ensuring his bloodline would continue that service after his death. I hadn't returned to Yellowstone for a job. I'd returned to activate an inherited obligation that had been waiting for me since before I was born. The entity's hollow form shifted, steam curling from joints that shouldn't exist. Its voice vibrated through my ribs again, not words, but meaning transmitted directly through bone. The covenant requires maintenance. Your bloodline preserves barriers. We gather the displaced before cascade events unmake entire seasons. I wanted to step back. Couldn't. My boots felt welded to the crystalline ground. Burning seasons approach. Geothermal pressure builds beneath containment thresholds. Rifts open where August touches November, where spring bleeds into winter. Travelers cross without understanding. They walk between timelines, and the crossing unmakes them. The Russell family stood motionless at the spring's edge. Kyle's translucent face showed no expression. The twin daughters hadn't moved since we'd arrived. We preserve fragments, prevent complete dissipation. Your grandfather understood necessity. He mapped 17 intersection points, established protocols to minimize crossings. But containment requires active intervention during burning seasons. Mariah's hand closed around my wrist. Her grip was iron tight. The entity extended one branching limb toward the hollow figures. These wandered through Grand Prismatic during yesterday's inversion. The rift opened at 1607. They crossed at 1643. November air temperature was 28 degrees. August was 71. The differential unmade cellular cohesion. My stomach turned over. The technical description made it worse somehow. Clinical, precise. Others arrive during each burning season. We gather them before fragments scatter completely. Prevent temporal contamination. Your grandfather mapped safe routes through active periods. Established evacuation protocols. But collection requires coordination. We cannot manifest outside thermal zones, cannot cross iron barriers, cannot pursue those who understand the protocols. The second entity emerged further from the spring. its form condensing from steam into something almost solid. Translucent skin revealed currents of superheated water flowing beneath the surface. We require assistance. Your bloodline maintains surface access, identifies displaced travelers, guides them to collection points during burning seasons before cascade events begin. No. Mariah's voice cut through the bone vibration communication. Francis never agreed to active collection. The covenant covered documentation and containment only. The first entity's eyeless face turned toward her. The blue-white glow intensified. Francis Russell understood necessity, wrote protocols to prevent crossings. But burning seasons increase in frequency, geothermal pressure builds, rifts open spontaneously. The displaced wander further from thermal zones. Fragment dispersion threatens temporal stability. A third entity surfaced, then a fourth. They rose from the glowing water with movements that defied physics, joints bending backward, limbs extending beyond reasonable proportion. The crystalline ground beneath my boots vibrated, not earthquake tremors, something else. The air temperature dropped another 10 degrees in seconds. This season's pressure exceeds previous thresholds. 17 intersection points showed geometric patterning. More rifts will open. More travelers will cross. We require collection assistance before November bleeds into August permanently. Mariah's grip on my wrist tightened until bones ground together. She pulled backward. One step, then another. Russell, we're leaving. Now. The entities moved, not walking, flowing across the clearing with impossible speed. The one closest to us abandoned any pretense of solid form, body collapsing into a column of superheated steam that writhed upward 12 feet, 15, 20. Molten rock glowed at its core, actual magma suspended in vapor, pulsing with each bone vibration word. The covenant requires fulfillment. Your bloodline accepted responsibility. Francis understood. You will understand. The human disguises they'd worn, if they'd ever truly worn them, dissolved completely. All four entities revealed themselves as walking contradictions. Bodies composed of elements that shouldn't coexist outside extreme geological conditions. Steam and magma, solid and vapor. Heat intense enough to liquefy stone contained in forms that moved with purpose. Mariah yanked me backward hard enough to break my paralysis. Move! I stumbled, caught myself. The orange paint marks on the trees behind us glowed faintly in my peripheral vision. 30 feet to the first marker, then 30 more. Then 30 more after that. The entities flowed forward. The clearing's temperature spiked. My exposed skin prickled with heat that had nothing to do with normal thermal radiation. Mariah's hand released my wrist and went to her equipment vest. She pulled something from an interior pocket, a silver canister the size of a road flare. Her thumb found a recessed button. Protocol 5 variant. Close your eyes. I squeezed them shut. Even through my eyelids I saw the violet flash. Felt it more than saw it. A pulse that resonated in my teeth, my bones, the base of my skull. The entities made sounds for the first time. Not bone vibration communication. Actual noise. A hissing shriek that climbed octaves into frequencies that made my inner ears ache. Run! Follow the paint marks. Don't stop. Mariah's voice came from my right. I opened my eyes to slits. The entities had recoiled to the spring's edge, their forms destabilized, steam and magma separating into distinct layers that struggled to reintegrate. I ran, 30 feet to the first orange mark. My boots hit crystalline ground, then gray clay, then mineral deposits. The detection equipment on Mariah's belt shrieked steady alarm tones. 0.92 variance, 0.85, 0.73. Behind us, the hissing grew louder. I risked a glance back. The entities were reforming, pursuing. moving through the dead lodgepole pines with the fluid inevitability of water flowing downhill. Mariah pulled a second item from her vest, a cloth bag that clinked with metallic sound. She tore it open one-handed while running, scattering contents in a wide arc behind us. Iron filings. Protocol 3. Carry iron filings when investigating unauthorized access. Where the filings hit ground, the entities stopped, not slowed. Stopped completely, forms recoiling from the scattered barrier with the same violent reaction they'd shown to the violet flash. Emergency thermal suits in the truck, move faster. 0.61 variance, 0.54. The air temperature climbed back toward normal. My visible breath dissipated. We burst from the restricted zone onto the maintained trail. Mariah's truck sat in the employee section 200 yards distant. She was already running toward it, equipment vest bouncing against her torso. I followed. My lungs burned. Not from exertion. From breathing air that had been too cold too fast, then heated again too quickly. Mariah reached the truck first, yanking open the rear cargo door. Inside sat 2 silver cases with hazmat symbols and military-grade clasps. She hauled one out, flipped the clasps, pulled out something that looked like a firefighter's protective suit made from materials I didn't recognize. Reflective outer layer, insulated interior, breathing apparatus attached. Put it on. Full seal. I grabbed the second suit from the case. My hands shook. Took 3 tries to get my boots through the leg openings. The material felt wrong, too light for its bulk, too flexible for something designed to handle extreme temperatures. Mariah already had hers on, breathing apparatus engaged. Her voice came through a small speaker near the collar. Francis developed these with Cochrane's classified budget. Rated to 1500 degrees, tested to 2000. Only thing that works when they manifest outside thermal zones. She pulled on insulated gloves and lifted the silver canister she'd used earlier. 3 more sat in the case's foam interior. The entities emerged from the tree line. They'd fully abandoned human configuration. No more bipedal approximation. Just living columns of superheated geological fury, each one 12 feet tall and radiating enough heat to blister the paint on Mariah's truck from 30 yards away. Mariah scattered another bag of iron filings in a wide semicircle around the truck. The entities stopped at the barrier. One extended a pseudopod of steam toward the iron line. Where vapor touched metal, both substances reacted violently, iron oxidizing instantly to red powder, steam condensing and flash boiling in rapid cycles. Get in. We're going to Francis's station. I climbed into the passenger seat, thermal suit making every movement awkward. Mariah slammed her door and gunned the engine. The truck lurched forward. In the side mirror, I watched the entities test the iron barrier, probing for gaps with patient malevolence. Mariah drove south, not toward headquarters, not toward any tourist facility I recognized. She took maintenance roads I'd never noticed during my 6 days on the job, following routes marked only by faded numerical codes on small metal posts. Where? Beneath the maintenance complex near Old Faithful. Francis built it in '92 after the protocols were established. Cochrane authorized construction as equipment storage. Nobody else knows it exists. 20 minutes of silent driving through service roads. The thermal suit's interior temperature regulation kept me from overheating, but sweat still ran down my spine. My hands hadn't stopped shaking. Mariah parked behind a nondescript prefab building that could have been storage, could have been offices, could have been anything. She grabbed both silver cases from the truck bed and led me to what looked like an electrical junction box on the building's north side. It wasn't. She opened the metal cover to reveal a numeric keypad. Entered 8 digits. The ground beside the junction box shifted, a section of concrete 3 feet square sinking downward with hydraulic precision, revealing steel stairs descending into darkness. Francis's research station. Everything he documented in 43 years. Come on. The stairs went down 20 feet. Motion sensor lights flickered on as we descended, revealing a space larger than I'd expected, 30 feet by 40. Drop ceiling with fluorescent panels, filing cabinets lining 3 walls, a desk with 2 computers, one modern, one clearly from the 90s. Corkboards covered with maps, photographs, handwritten notes in Francis's precise printing. Mariah set down the cases and removed her breathing apparatus. I did the same. The air smelled stale, climate-controlled but unused recently. Cochran and I are the only ones who've been here since Francis died. He wanted you to see it when you were ready. Guess ready came faster than expected. I walked to the nearest filing cabinet, pulled open the top drawer. Manila folders packed tight, each one labeled with dates and locations. I pulled one at random. June 1994, Norris Geyser Basin, family of 3. Inside, photographs of a hot spring with geometric steam patterns, witness statements describing a family asking about the new visitor center that had been demolished in 1987, credit card receipts dated 2 months in the future, a map with handwritten notes in Francis's printing, rift opened 1410, shears closed, 1547 shears variance peaked at 0.91. Family entered thermal zone at approximately 1430. Not recovered. I pulled another folder. September 1998. Artist Point, elderly couple. More photographs. More witness statements. A hotel registration for dates that didn't exist. September 31st. A note. Both subjects reported winter conditions, while temperatures recorded at 68 degrees. Last seen near steam vent showing violet luminescence. Protocol 5 established following this incident. Another folder. Another. Each one the same impossible pattern. Families vanishing near thermal features, making reservations for non-existent dates, asking about facilities destroyed years earlier, describing weather conditions that didn't match recorded data. How many? My voice came out hoarse. Mariah stood at the desk, booting up the modern computer. 73 documented cases since Francis started keeping detailed records in '89, but the pattern goes back further. He found incident reports in park archives from the 20s, the teens, even 1880s survey journals mentioning travelers who walked into steam and vanished as though swallowed by the earth itself. The computer screen illuminated her face. She pulled up a database, custom software, clearly Francis's work. Rows and columns of data, dates, locations, variance measurements, outcomes. Most of the outcome column read the same. Not recovered. Your grandfather spent 43 years documenting this, mapping the intersection points, establishing protocols to prevent crossings, training staff who could handle the information, all while maintaining his covenant with things that shouldn't exist. She turned to face me. The thermal anomalies aren't recent, Russell. They've been happening since geothermal activity first created conditions for temporal rifts, since before the park was established, before anyone understood what they were dealing with. I opened another cabinet drawer, found folders dating back to the early 90s, then the late 80s, each one meticulously documented. Photographs, witness statements, measurements taken with equipment that must have been cutting edge for its time. Francis had known. For decades. He'd mapped every disappearance, cataloged every impossibility, built an entire hidden archive of phenomena the public never suspected existed, and he'd arranged for me to inherit it all. I pulled another drawer open. Metal runners scraped against the frame, loud in the underground quiet. Inside sat rolled maps secured with rubber bands, their edges yellowed and brittle. I lifted one out carefully. The band snapped when I touched it, disintegrating after decades of compression. The map unrolled across the table's surface. USGS topographical overlay dated 1989 with Francis's additions in red ink. 17 sites marked with precise coordinates and annotations. Grand Prismatic Spring. Variance threshold, 0.84. Active during temperature inversions exceeding 15 degree Fahrenheit differential. August-November corridor documented 1991, 1994, 2003. Artist point. Geometric manifestation radius 4.6 meters. Circular pattern indicates echo phenomenon, not active rift. Monitor for expansion. Norris Geyser Basin, northwest sector. Primary collection point. Variance ceiling 0.92. Entity manifestation confirmed. Iron barrier effective at 300 G dispersal rate. Each location had measurements, temporal variance readings, dates of documented incidents. Francis hadn't just observed the phenomena, he'd quantified it, mapped it, turned impossible geological contradictions into data sets. There's more. Mariah stood at the filing cabinet against the far wall holding a leather-bound ledger. Not a modern thing. Old, with hand-sewn binding and water stains along the bottom edge. I crossed the room. She opened it to the first page. October 1924. Edmund Russell. Commenced monitoring duties as agreed. 17 sites confirmed active. Collection protocols established with heat shepherds per covenant terms. My hands went cold. Edmund Russell, I said, Francis's father. Keep reading. I turned pages. The handwriting changed every few decades, but the surname stayed constant. Edmund Russell until 1947. Thomas Russell from 47 to 73. Francis Russell from 73 to this February. 100 years, 4 generations, all doing the same work in secret. The entries documented everything: displacement events, entity encounters, containment procedures. Edmund had written detailed protocols for iron barrier deployment, noting that ferrous oxide disrupted temporal variance fields and prevented entity manifestation outside thermal zones. Thomas had refined the monitoring equipment, developing the handheld detector Francis later improved. Francis had digitized the records and established the current protocol system, but he'd inherited the foundation from his father and grandfather before him. How far back does this go? My voice sounded thin. Mariah turned to the ledger's first page again. Edmund's initial entry references duties as agreed. He didn't start the covenant. Someone before him did. I looked at the maps, the equipment, the decades of documentation. Francis had spent his entire career maintaining something his father had passed down. Edmund had done the same. The job had consumed their lives. Every thermal reading, every variance measurement, every missing person investigation building toward the moment when they'd hand it to the next Russell. To me. Francis's death. I stopped. Started again. February 15th, heart attack at his kitchen table. That's what the coroner said. But the timing. I pulled out my phone, opened the calendar. He died exactly 8 days before the petroleum positions fell through. 10 days before Mom mentioned the Park Service opening. 2 weeks before I applied. Mariah didn't confirm or deny. Just watched me work through it. Francis had known. Somehow he'd known the mining companies would cancel their hiring, that I'd be looking for work, that Mom would mention his old position. Or he'd arranged it. Made calls. Pulled strings. Ensured I'd come back to Yellowstone exactly when the covenant needed to transfer. His death hadn't interrupted the work. It had completed it. I sat down hard in the desk chair. The leather creaked under my weight, worn smooth from decades of use. Francis had sat here. His father before him. Now me. The entities said Francis made the covenant, I said. But he was 27 when he started working here. The covenant's older than that. Francis renewed it, Mariah said. Every generation does. The heat shepherds can't maintain containment alone. They need someone who can move freely, monitor the intersection points, identify displaced travelers before cascade events occur. And in exchange, they collect the displaced, prevent temporal contamination, keep the rifts from expanding beyond geothermal boundaries. I looked at the maps again. 17 sites scattered across the park's thermal features, each one a potential crossing point where August could bleed into November, where families on vacation could walk between seasons and come apart at the molecular level. The heat shepherds weren't hunting people. They were cleaning up after catastrophic failures, gathering the fragments before they contaminated entire timelines. They're not the threat, I said. No. The rifts are. The temporal instability. The burning seasons. Mariah nodded. The entities exist because the geothermal activity creates temporal weak points. They've been managing the displacement for longer than we've had records. But they can't cross iron barriers, can't manifest outside thermal zones, can't identify displaced travelers until they've already crossed and started coming apart. So they need us. They need the Russell bloodline specifically. The covenant binds your family to the work, makes you compatible with their methods, allows communication. I thought about the entity's voice vibrating through my bones, the way it had known Francis's name, known about the covenant, known I'd been orchestrated back to Yellowstone. What happens if I refuse? The entities lose their human interface. Displaced travelers go uncollected. Temporal contamination spreads. Cascade events multiply. Mariah pulled out another file, this one marked with red warning tape. Francis documented a near cascade in 2003. Family of 5 crossed during a thermal inversion at Grand Prismatic. Variance hit 0.97. The rift started expanding 3 feet per hour. By the time Francis identified them and guided them to the collection point, the displacement zone had grown from 8 feet to 42 feet in diameter. The file contained photographs, a massive steam circle around Grand Prismatic, far larger than natural geothermal activity could explain. Measurement readings showing variance approaching 0.99, and 5 translucent figures standing at the spring's edge, hollow shells waiting for collection. If the variance reaches 1.0, Mariah said, the temporal boundary collapses completely. 2 time periods occupy the same space simultaneously. Everything within the zone becomes unmade. How large would the zone get? Francis calculated a full cascade event could consume the entire thermal basin. Maybe larger. Hundreds of square miles where time stops functioning correctly. Everyone inside displaced, unmade, transformed into fragments. I set the file down carefully. My hands wanted to shake, but I kept them steady. This wasn't about fighting supernatural entities or containing dangerous spirits. The heat shepherds were doing their job. They'd been doing it for centuries, maybe longer, but they couldn't do it alone. They needed someone who could monitor the intersection points, identify displaced travelers early, guide them to collection zones before the rifts expanded beyond control. They needed someone who could prevent the crossings in the first place. The protocols, I said. They're not just safety guidelines. No, they're containment procedures. Each one addresses a specific type of temporal instability. Mariah pulled the laminated card from her pocket. Protocol 1. Temperature inversions create the atmospheric conditions for rifts to form. Protocol 2. Voices from unoccupied features indicate echo phenomena, temporal audio bleeding between time periods. Protocol 3. Iron filings disrupt variance fields and prevent entity manifestation. Protocol 4. Geometric steam patterns mark active rift zones. Protocol 5. Violet luminescence indicates variance exceeding 0.85. Protocol 6. Temporal discrepancies in digital equipment signal proximity to displacement zones. Every rule Francis had written came from direct experience, from decades of monitoring, measuring, documenting, from watching people cross between seasons and come apart, from trying to prevent it from happening again. My role isn't to fight the heat shepherds, I said, stating it clearly, making sure I understood. It's to work with them, monitor the thermal features, identify displaced travelers before they cross completely, guide them to collection points while they can still be preserved. Yes, and if I can't reach them in time, Mariah's expression didn't change. Then they become what you saw at Norris. Hollow shells. Fragments the entities preserved to prevent complete dissipation and temporal contamination. The Russell family. The elderly couple in 1970s hiking gear, the young man in Depression-era clothing, all of them displaced, unmade, collected, all of them beyond saving, because no one had identified them early enough. No one had guided them away from the rifts before they crossed. No one had been monitoring the intersection points when the variance spiked and the boundaries collapsed. The thermal features weren't just geological phenomena. They were conduits between different time periods, powered by geothermal energy and temporal instability. And they required constant monitoring, constant intervention. Someone who could read the variance patterns, predict when rifts would open, prevent travelers from crossing during burning seasons when the boundaries grew thin. Someone from the Russell bloodline, bound by covenant to maintain the work. I looked at the maps, the equipment, the decades of documentation filling Francis's hidden archive. Everything he'd built, everything his father and grandfather had maintained before him. A century of secret work protecting people from temporal catastrophes they'd never know existed. Now, mine to continue. I met with Superintendent Cochran 3 days after the Norris encounter. Her office sat on the second floor of the administration building near Mammoth Hot Springs, windows overlooking the terraced formations that had been depositing travertine for thousands of years. She'd cleared her afternoon calendar. "Your grandfather sat in that same chair in 1973, she said. Didn't offer coffee or pleasantries. Told me the whole story when I transferred here in '94. Took me 6 months to believe him. I had Francis's ledger in my lap. The leather binding felt warm from my hands during the drive north. We need updated protocols, I said. The heat shepherds want active assistance, collection duty. Francis documented cases, but never agreed to guide people toward the entities." Cochran pulled a folder from her desk drawer. "I know, but burning seasons are accelerating. Look at the frequency." The folder contained incident reports dating back to 1989. 2 cases that year, 3 in '92, 5 in '98. The numbers climbed steadily until the current year showed 11 documented displacements in 8 months. "We can't hand people over," I said. "That's not containment. That's preventing cascade events." She tapped the most recent report. "Grand Prismatic, August 19th, family of 4. Variance hit .97 before your grandfather intervened. You read that file?" I had. Photographs showed steam circles expanding in real time, rift diameter measurements increasing every hour. "We establish medical emergency protocols," Cochran continued. "Thermal exposure, heat exhaustion, disorientation from hydrogen sulfide exposure. All plausible. All documented conditions that explain confused tourists, time discrepancies, unusual behavior." She slid a laminated card across the desk. "This gets filed with dispatch. Anyone reporting these symptoms gets routed to you or Harper immediately." The card listed symptoms I'd already seen in Francis's documentation: confusion about current date, insistence on reservations that don't exist, descriptions of demolished or not yet built structures, wearing seasonal clothing inappropriate for current conditions, watches or phones displaying incorrect times that don't reset. "And when I identify them," I asked, "you monitor, document. If they're already displaced, if they've crossed, you coordinate with the entities per covenant terms." Cochran's expression didn't change. "If they're showing pre-displacement symptoms, you prevent the crossing. Iron barriers at thermal features during inversions, restricted area closures, whatever containment requires." I put the card in my shirt pocket next to the protocols Francis had written. "How do I return someone who's already crossed?" Cochran pulled out a second folder, thicker. Francis's handwriting covered every page. Learning to identify displacement took 4 weeks of observation. Mariah taught me to watch for the tells. We worked the grand prismatic overlook on a Tuesday morning in mid-September. 20 tourists clustered along the boardwalk, cameras pointed at the rainbow-colored spring steaming below. Mariah stood beside me with detection equipment disguised as a thermal monitoring tablet. "There," she said quietly. "Gray jacket, 40-something male." I watched him, nothing obvious at first. He took photographs, checked his phone, leaned against the railing. Then I saw it. He pulled out his phone 3 times in 5 minutes. Each time he checked the display, his forehead creased. He turned the phone off and back on, shook it once. "Clock's wrong," I said. ".48 variance here," Mariah confirmed. "Not enough for crossing, but he's feeling it. Watch." The man approached a younger couple. I moved closer, pretending to check boardwalk conditions. "Excuse me, is your phone showing the right time?" His voice carried uncertainty. "Mine keeps jumping forward. Says it's almost noon, but that can't be right." The couple checked their phones. 11:17, they told him. Both devices matched. The man stared at his screen. 11:53, it displayed. He'd lost 36 minutes somewhere between the parking area and the overlook. Mariah intercepted him with practiced efficiency, introduced herself as thermal monitoring staff, asked about symptoms, dizziness, nausea, confusion, all standard questions. The man admitted feeling lightheaded, disoriented. "Hydrogen sulfide exposure," Mariah explained. "Concentrations higher than usual today. We're advising sensitive individuals to move to open areas." She guided him away from the thermal feature toward the parking lot, away from the .48 variance zone. Symptoms should clear within 20 minutes of fresh air exposure. I watched his phone display through binoculars as he walked. 11:19. Time had corrected itself once he left the variance field. That evening, I documented the incident in Francis's database. Minor displacement effect, prevented crossing, no entity contact required. 3 days later, I identified my first active case. She stood at Artist Point Overlook wearing a parka in 70-degree weather. Late 50s, maybe. Kept asking the ranger on duty about the shuttle schedule to Canyon Village. "There hasn't been a shuttle route here since 2009, the ranger explained, patient but confused. I approached with detection equipment. .62 variance, higher than it should be without geometric manifestation. "Ma'am, I'm with Thermal Features Monitoring. Can I ask when you arrived at the park?" She turned. Her eyes didn't quite focus on me. "This morning. Took the shuttle from Mammoth. But the driver said something about route changes, and I'm supposed to meet my husband at Canyon Village by 2 o'clock. "What's today's date?" I asked. "October 7th, 2008. No hesitation. Complete certainty. My detection equipment read September 22nd, current year. She'd crossed from 14 years prior. I radioed Mariah using the coded phrases Cochrane had established. "Thermal anomaly at Artist Point. Need equipment support for possible exposure incident." The woman's skin had started looking translucent around the edges, not fully unmade yet, but deteriorating. Francis's documentation included protocols for this scenario. I guided her away from the overlook toward the maintenance road, talking constantly to keep her focused. Asked about her husband, her trip, anything to maintain coherence. Mariah arrived with the equipment cases and ironed filings. "We need to get you to medical attention," Mariah told her. "Use the thermal exposure story." The woman followed us, confused but compliant. We drove north to Norris, the restricted zone, .92 variance at the collection point. The heat shepherds were waiting when we arrived with the woman walking between us. They'd learned to maintain more stable forms during collection. Still wrong, still impossible, but less immediately threatening. One entity approached with that bone vibration communication. She crossed during morning inversion. October 2008 touched September current year. Cellular cohesion failing. I know. I kept my voice steady. That's why we brought her. Covenant terms honored. Collection proceeds. The woman saw the entities then, started to scream, but her voice faded as they gathered around her, and within seconds she joined the other translucent figures standing at the spring's edge. Preserved. Unmade but not dissipated. I documented everything that night. Time of crossing, variance readings, collection procedures. Added her case to the database as number 74. Frances had done this for decades. Now it was my responsibility. But prevention became the priority. Frances's notes contained detailed procedures for controlled geothermal releases, using the park's natural thermal cycles to stabilize variance before crossings occurred. The technique required precise timing. I'd monitor variance readings across all 17 intersection points, tracking the patterns Frances had mapped. When variance started climbing toward crossing threshold, usually 0.75 or higher, I'd coordinate with Mariah to trigger controlled steam releases at adjacent thermal features. The geothermal pressure would redistribute. Variance would drop. Crisis averted. We prevented 4 potential crossings in October alone using Frances's methods. A family at Grand Prismatic showing pre-displacement symptoms. 2 separate individuals at Norris experiencing time discrepancies. A tour group at Artist Point during a temperature inversion that spiked variance to 0.81. Each time, controlled releases brought the numbers down before anyone crossed between timelines. The thermal features stopped being geological curiosities. They became tools, pressure valves. Containment systems that had existed since the Yellowstone caldera formed 640,000 years ago. I'd thought I was coming here to monitor temperatures and write reports, maybe spend a season before moving on to petroleum work or mining surveys, corporate positions with actual career trajectories. Instead, I was maintaining barriers between August and November, preventing tourists from walking into timelines that would unmake them, coordinating with entities made of superheated geological impossibilities, and carrying forward a covenant my great-great-grandfather had established a century before I was born. Frances had known exactly what he was doing when he orchestrated my return. The Russell bloodline wasn't just compatible with entity communication. We'd been shaped by generations of this work, trained through inherited instinct and documented knowledge to recognize the signs, understand the patterns, and maintain the balance that kept temporal rifts from consuming the park entirely. This wasn't temporary work. This was what I'd been meant for all along, whether I'd known it or not.